moin, guten Morgen. Wie gesagt, bin Alex, bin Handelsbeauftragter an der kanadischen Botschaft in Berlin. Wird in Deutsch anfangen und dann nach zu Englisch wechseln. Als ganz kurze Vorstellung, Kanada hat kein Auslandshandelskammernetzwerk wie Deutschland, so wir sind ein Ersatz. Es ist unsere Aufgabe, kanadische Firmen auf dem deutschen Markt zu unterstützen. Aber nicht nur diese kanadischen Firmen auf dem deutschen Markt zu unterstützen, sondern kanadische und deutsche Firmen zusammenzubringen. Ob das Forschungspartnerschaften bedeutet oder ein Pilotprojekt zusammen zu basteln, wir könnten dann alles zusammenbringen. So, Kanada und Deutschland, wie auch schon gesagt, die teilen dann ganz viel. And they're facing the same crisis. The last 3 years, there's been a lot of discussion about this in Germany, in Canada, and that's what today's about. This isn't going to be a sales pitch for why you should buy from Canadian companies. We'll share some of what's going on in Canada and how that is also similar to Germany and how we can work together to tackle these problems. Oh, and the clicker is not going. Oh, there we go. Okay, so as I said, 2 countries, same crisis. Germany, as of the start of this year, was reporting 1.4 million apartments are missing. In Canada, we need to build 450,000 new housing units a year just to restore affordability. That's not to address the problems, it's just to restore affordability. And as you'll be able to see, we're not building anywhere near enough on either side. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Council warns that housing starts running 40% below what's needed to restore affordability. That's not to bring back or to make sure that things are good, it's just to bring back some level of affordability. And as you can see on the left in Berliner Zeitung, wenn wir nicht anders bauen, bauen wir bald gar nicht mehr. So these are both the same story from the 2 different countries. It's not that we don't have solutions. Everyone knows that we need to do. Both countries have tried incremental responses. They haven't worked. And so what Canada is doing now is a structural change. And that's why it's worth paying attention to. So, as I mentioned, same constraints, even though there's different systems. Labor gaps, rising costs, slow approvals. Completions, both are down. In Canada, we need to double what we're building right now. Labor costs in Germany, as everyone hears time and again, the Fachkraftmangel continues to deepen. And in Canada, since COVID, labor costs have gone up more than 40%. And then what everyone always hears, and I come from Berlin, rents in Berlin are up almost 70% in the last decade. And in Canada, it's even worse. Toronto and Vancouver are as expensive or more expensive than London. The constraint isn't technology. If you look outside, you can see that. If you go to Canada, you can see that. The constraint is deployment. And how do we deal with deploying technologies and solutions and deregulating to help solve these issues? So, what's the problem? Pilot purgatory is what I'm calling it. There's lots of pilots. You can talk to any of the startups out there. You can talk to the Canadian companies I work with, even some of the Canadian companies who are active in the German market. Lots of them are able to get pilots. The issue then becomes how to shift from a pilot to an actual business plan. The technology exists, the pilots exist, and the conferences exist. We've got this conference. You see Expo Real is spending more and more time on PropTech. You have Real Estate Arena in Hanover in a couple of months. There's no shortage of conferences or think tanks or people discussing this. What's missing is the architecture to turn these pilots into standard operating practice. There needs to be not just funding, but adoption. There's lots of funding, there's lots of VCs, but how do we convince builders on both sides of the Atlantic that they need to start adopting these systems? So, what Canada did very recently is to establish something called Built Canada Homes. This is in September of 2025, and it's a new government agency. It's been $13 billion Canadian committed to this. It's, depending on the exchange rate, 7 to 8 billion euros. And it's a procurement vehicle. They've been tasked with reducing the build time by 50% while also reducing cost and emissions targets. And so procurement isn't just how governments support markets, It's how they can create markets. And the goal of this is to be able to support Canadian industry and to provide a long-term procurement stability. Because if you're going to be cutting procurement by 50% and building times by 50%, you need stability and security to know that the orders are going to be there. And so whether that means through modular building, whether that means through new BIM and AI methods, whether that means through brand new technologies that are just being deployed now, this sort of monetary commitment backs up that procurement pipeline. And so this allows builders to work with startups and new technology companies and know that there's federal funding available. Just in the last few weeks, we've seen more than 3,000 new units approved through this program. And most importantly in this program, this is for non-market housing. This is for affordable housing. Depending on which Canadian province you look at, that can mean anywhere between 30 and 35% of brutto income for rent, no more than that. And this is partnerships between the federal government and the provinces. This only works if there's partnerships. And so this is on the demand side. This is making sure that there's a long-term project pipeline to ensure new materials, new technologies, and more sustainable technologies, as you can see in the emissions targets, have runway to be deployed. On the supply side, the government's also become involved in the Centre for Housing Innovation. So this is an accelerator program, and I know you're all thinking, oh yay, another accelerator, as if we don't have enough of those. And this is with Toronto Metropolitan University. However, it's a little bit different because it's bringing together government, industry, and research institutions at once. And so on the government side, you have the Federal Development Agency for Ontario. Through industry, you have what's known as next generation manufacturing. This is the industry cluster in Canada. They're actually in Hanover right now at Hannover Messe. They're in charge of bringing industry together to figure out how do we tackle this issue? How can we make sure that the newest technologies that are being shown off in Hannover this year, that were being shown off in Hannover last year when Canada was partner country, how can they be better deployed to help solve this issue? Then there's also Groundbreak Ventures, a VC group that's joined in. So there's real money behind this. But in Canada at least, and as you've seen with $13 billion of funding, the money is not necessarily the issue, it's the implementation. You're going to see a few companies here that have come through the Centre for Housing Innovation, as well as the companies that they've worked with in Canada, and some of those who have also come to Germany already to see what it is that they can learn from the German side. And so just in the first cohort, and again, this is very new, this has only been going on for the last year, the first cohort of companies has seen more than $85 million in project proposals adopted, 600 buildings onboarded, and there's been 14 companies supported through this. And so this is just an example of the federal government on one side having the demand and saying, we need to build better, we need to build faster, we need to build more sustainable, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is. And then on the other side, the government also supporting on the supply side and making sure these startups know that, hey, there is support for you to help through the nitty-gritty stuff, the stuff that no one ever really likes to talk about, whether it's IP protection, whether it's founding a business, accounting, immigration, getting people in, because there's competition now for the best and the brightest. And especially, as many of you have probably heard from Prime Minister Mark Carney and his Davos speech that went everywhere, the relationship between Canada and the US is not what it used to be, and we're looking to diversify. Resilience is important for us, and that especially so in the housing market, because for any government now, housing is table stakes. If you can't succeed in providing new affordable housing, you're not going to be around for very long. So, as I was mentioning, this is the plan. We're a year in, we'll see if it works, but this is the plan. You have Build Canada Homes, which is the federal procurement demand signal to say, we're going to make this happen. This is on federal land, which helps speed up approval processes. It's also with federal and provincial money. And as I mentioned, it's affordable, non-market housing. Centre for Housing Innovation. in Toronto. FedDev is Ontario government money, 6-month commercialization accelerator, so we're just seeing the results of the first cohort here now. And Germany has systems like this as well, and it's not that the desire isn't there, we're just failing on the scaling portion. Build Canada Homes creates the demand. Canadian Centre for Housing Innovation ideally should create the supply, and the whole idea is to reduce the first mover risk, because as I'm sure if there's startups here who have spoken with Bauen and so weiter, there's always a okay, but so what question. And the so what is delivery at scale. And these companies need the long-term project pipeline to be able to invest in these solutions. And that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about 3 different playbooks that Centre for Housing Innovation has used on this. Some of them are going to sound quite familiar. The first one being industrialized construction, speed, labor, lower carbon materials. How do we build differently? Because it's clear that how we're building right now isn't working. So what you see here is a robot in a factory doing serial building. Now, if you're familiar with Gropius, this probably looks very familiar. However, this is in Canada. This is a company called Promise Robotics. A big difference in Canada compared to Europe is much of housing right now is not built in any sort of thing that any sort of way that could be pictured as serial. It's all on site. That's what Promise Robotics is hoping to change. They're also a member of the Next Generation Manufacturing Cluster. So they've partnered with Mattamy Homes, which is one of Canada's largest home builders, family-owned Mittelstand, and Mattamy Homes was in Munich last year visiting German companies to see what they can take from Germany as well. They think that with Promise Robotics, and this has been rolled out in some of Canada, they can have double the output with the same labor. Part of the problem we have in Canada now, and you likely haven't been following the news, but immigration is a large topic in Canada, just as it is here, is we don't have enough roofers, we don't have enough builders, we don't have enough engineers or architects. And so even if the federal government rolled out all $13 billion this year, it wouldn't do anything because we simply don't have the productivity to be able to build more with less people. That's what Promise Robotics is being able to do. 60% faster construction and a factory as a service model. They can do any typology. It's not just a single solution. And this isn't about labor replacement. It's about making labor more productive. And that's what we need on both sides of the Atlantic. We can't simply keep doing the same things that we've been doing and expect things to get better. We need to experiment and figure out how can we make the workers that we have now more productive. So, second one I want to talk about, and I know sustainability has kind of gone a little bit under recently. ESG isn't the topic it would have been 2 years ago, the last time I was here, but it's still important in this area, and in particular in Canada, where the government remains committed to the Paris climate goals. And in Canada, we can tend to get a little bit lazy on sustainability compared to Germany. Our power costs are a quarter to a third of what German power costs are, which means that heating, while of course more expensive now than it was 3 years ago, is nowhere near the bugbear that it is here. And so while the Canadian building environment needs to be able to adapt from -30 to +30, we can get lazy compared to the solutions that need to be rolled out in Germany. So, the first one I want to talk about is CarbonCure. CarbonCure is a Canadian company from the East Coast. They've actually worked with Heidelberg Cement before. Concrete, 7 to 10% of global CO2 emissions, depending on who you talk to. And CarbonCure in Halifax is injecting captured CO2 into fresh concrete. Carbon capture and utilization and storage is a big topic. There was a German delegation that went to Canada and Edmonton last year to discuss exactly this. Canada, and I can proudly say this, carbon capture and storage is one of the very few industrial areas where I can stand on this stage and say Canadian solutions are ahead of where Germany's at. Germany comes to Canada to learn about carbon capture and storage, and this is a very interesting use case there. The concrete is stronger with less cement, so it costs less, not more, and it installs in existing plants. There's no new facility required. Heidelberg has a huge footprint across the world, not just in Germany. This is another opportunity for Canadian and German companies to work together. It's been 750,000 tons of CO2 emissions saved to date. They just announced that last week. And this remains something that is overlooked in a lot of building projects, especially if you've seen views of the Toronto skyline. Toronto is often used as a stand-in for New York, for Hollywood, because it's cheaper to film in Toronto than it is in New York. But almost everything that's gone up in Toronto in the last 10 years has been skyscrapers, condominiums being built with this concrete, and that's also a problem that we can talk about later. So, sustainability that survives, and tying metrics directly to cost, risk, and financing. So another one of the companies that's recently gone through the Center for Housing Innovation is Packville. They're making structural panels from recycled plastic. So they're taking 8 traditional materials using recycled plastic, and the panels that they're building, if you believe them, we'll see, none of us will be around to fact check the work, has a 400-year lifespan. So that helps on your life cycle assessment cost. Pomerleau is one of Canada's largest engineering and construction firms. 70% of their 2024 revenue can be tracked to sustainability projects. Now, what they classify as sustainability projects might be a little broader than what some people do, but it's clear that sustainability is a driver for them. It's not a nice to have. It's not maybe we can do this because it gets us good publicity. It's something that they're really targeting. And so costs down by 35% while also reducing your emissions. And so again, this is another example here of tying sustainability to dollars. And then last one we'll talk about is data. It's on everyone's mind, particularly nowadays when you talk about AI. It doesn't matter what AI tool you're using if your data isn't good. If you don't have the right data foundation, none of the tools are going to be able to help you. And so there's a couple interesting opportunities I want to talk about here, including our first one, Levin. So Levin's quite interesting. It is something that doesn't sound super interesting to begin with. It's a light switch company. However, the light switches do not need to be wired to the system. They're wireless. Means if you decide all of a sudden, you know what, that light switch there on the wall, not too keen on that placement, you unscrew it, put it in another part of the wall. Now, part of the issue that they faced was, in Canada, the regulatory bodies thought they were crazy. Took years for them to get approval. They were actually able to get approval in the United States before they got approval in Canada. And it's something that we as Canadians, and I know from dealing with various authorities in Germany, is also an issue. There needs to be more ability to experiment. And so if any of you have been paying attention to critical materials and critical raw materials recently, another thing this does is saves a lot of money on copper. You need less copper wiring in the houses. So not only is it a benefit for the house owner to be able to put these switches wherever they want, for the house builder, it means that it's cheaper to build the house and it's faster, and that you can have a smart home right at handover. They've reached a partnership already with Schneider Electric Canada. Schneider Electric Canada is distributing these already. So again, this is not just a startup that's got a cool project and a nice PowerPoint presentation. This is in distribution right now. It fits the existing workflows. It means that things can be built faster, built cheaper, and built smarter. Last one I'll highlight is a company called Adaptus. And so when I was talking about AI, this is the AI play here. They're working with existing building data, and they've got internally, and I've seen it work, a data cleaner. Has reusable outputs, and it can take buildings, analyze them, and figure out what the easiest way to rebuild them, or sanering. I can't think of the English word right now. And so it allows you to run through in 3 days, how can we make this building cleaner? How can we make it more sustainable? And frankly, most importantly, how can we make it the most financially sustainable? Because at the end of the day, you need to be able to have the financials work. So what I wanted to close with is, how do we build this together? Because it's important that I don't just stand up here and talk about how great Canada is and why you should all work with Canadians. An interesting example of this, the AHK, Auslandshandelskammer in Toronto, at the end of next month, end of May, start of June, they actually have a Gebäudeeffizienz delegation going to Canada. They start in Toronto, they end in Vancouver. That is German industry. This is gefordert von BMW, and they're seeing there's market opportunity in Canada for Germany and Canada to work together. Because at the end of the day, and as all of you know, and as I constantly tell the Canadian companies I work with, you can't just come to Germany as a Canadian company, fly to Hamburg, fly to Frankfurt, fly to Munich, like you can in the US, close a deal in a couple days and fly home. You need local partners. And that's always what we push here in Germany, is to work together, build partnerships, whether that's on pilots, research and development. It's also what German companies going to Canada can leverage. The AHK in Toronto is a great partner of ours at the embassy. We're working together with them on this Gebäudeeffizienz delegation. They're actually going to be visiting the Center for Housing Innovation in Toronto as part of their trip. And so there's opportunities already to see what Canada has to offer. And the other way to build this together, and it's a little teaser, you'll have to watch the news. There's a program between Canada and Germany called IRAP-ZIM. IRAP on one side is Canada's Industrial Research Assistance Program. ZIM is the Zentrales Innovationsprogramm Mittelstand. So these are two R&D support programs, and there's a bestimmte Topf von Fördergeld. Das ist nur erhältlich, wenn man eine kanadische Firma auf einer Seite hat und eine deutsche Firma auf der anderen Seite hat. And I can share, I can't say who just yet, but in the next couple of months it will come out that the first Proptech project has been funded through IRAP-ZIM. So a Canadian company, a German company have come together, both KMU, and they're going to get Fördergeld from Canada and Germany to roll out Proptech solutions. So that's my pitch to everyone here, is it's not just work with Canadian companies, but talk about how we can do these pilots, how we can do R&D together, and how we can make sure that we're building resilience and cross-border supply chains. Because thanks to CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, 98% of all tariffs between Canada and Germany are gone. There's a lot of great ways to do this. I was just at the Bundesarchitektenkammer's Politische Frühlingsempfang last week. The first Canadian architecture company to open an office in Europe has opened in Berlin. There's a lot of opportunities. The Network for Architectural Exchange from the Bundesarchitektenkammer was in Toronto last year. They added Toronto on to what was just supposed to be an American trip. Because of everything that's going on in the United States, I can say that Canada is perhaps a more reliable and trustworthy partner. You don't need to check Twitter X every morning to see what Prime Minister Carney has decided to do on building regulations, trade regulations, etc. And that's the message I want to leave you all with, is we need to work together on this. And as you've seen, none of these Canadian solutions here, you can find similar solutions in Germany. There's nothing here that is truly unicat, but it's on implementation and how do we implement this better together.
Alex, thank you very much. Dankeschön.
Danke.
Wir switchen zwischen Englisch und Deutsch. Ich komme mal neben dich und wir haben die Möglichkeit, noch Fragen zu beantworten. Das geht über unser Slido-Tool. Nochmal da die Einladung. Hier unten ist ein QR-Code. Wenn Sie den einscannen, dann können Sie ganz einfach Ihre Frage dort einblenden. Und natürlich geht das aber auch ganz fröhlich mit einem Handzeichen. Ich gucke ab und zu mal da rein. Heute ist die Technik so ein bisschen mit einem Wurm drin. Deswegen öffne ich jetzt hier diese Frage, die ich gerne vorlesen möchte und hoffe drauf, dass sie lädt. Nämlich, die hat sich gerade mal ganz kurz verabschiedet. Aber vielleicht ist irgendjemand noch mal ein bisschen konfirmer als ich und kann mir dabei helfen und würde mir das noch mal ganz kurz bereitstellen, weil da haben wir nämlich direkt schon eine digitale Frage, die ich gerne, Alex, dir stellen würde, die uns erreicht hat. Bis dahin, ihr seht schon, die Technik gibt uns die Chance, noch mal ganz entspannt den QR-Code zu nutzen und vielleicht noch eine Frage einzutippen, weil wir haben noch ein paar Minuten Zeit miteinander. Ich schaue erstmal, hat jemand vielleicht eine Handzeichenfrage? Wunderbar. Würdest du einmal nach vorne kommen, dann kann ich dir nämlich das Mikrofon kurz rüberreichen.
Perfekt. Ja, Stefan Poser ist mein Name und die Frage habe ich eingestellt. Also von daher brauchte jetzt die Kollegin nicht so ewig da lang zu suchen. Einfach nochmal persönlich. Ganz spannend, was Sie da formuliert haben. Ich war ein bisschen überrascht, dass Sie in Kanada ähnlich viele Probleme haben, wie wir sie in Deutschland wahrnehmen. In Deutschland ist es so, dass wir als Ursache stark verorten die hohe Regulatorik, hohe Normen, hohe Standards und so weiter. Ja. Also klar, man kann über, wie Sie es ausskizziert haben, serielles Bauen natürlich die Baukosten runtertreiben, in die Richtung geht's. Aber wir glauben, ein großer Hebel wird sein, die Regulatorik und die Normen runterzubringen. Also Stichwort Gebäude Typ E. Wie ist die Situation da in Kanada? Haben Sie da eine ähnliche hohe Standards? Wie passt das so rein in Ihre Analyse?
Ja, das ist eine ganz gute Frage. Und so eine Idee, und es ist noch nicht implementiert, aber so wenn es geht um den Building Codes, Kanada hat den National Research Council. IRAP gehört zu National Research Council und alles, wenn es geht um Gebäudecodes, gehört zu National Research Council. Die hatten die Idee, so nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg in Kanada gab es dann ein Portfolio. Es gab 10, 12, 14 verschiedene Gebäudetypen, das man dann ohne Zusage bauen könnte. Das ist dann irgendwann in den 70er, 80er Jahren vorbeigefahren, aber diese Idee ist dann zurückgebracht, um zu sagen, dass, okay, wenn es geht um dann diese 6, 8, 9 verschiedene Gebäudetypen, kann man dann ganz einfach hier was bauen. Und dann, das bedeutet, dass man muss nicht 6, 9, 12 Monate lang auf den Bauamt warten, bis man eine Zusage bekommt. Es gibt immer noch Probleme in Kanada und auch wenn man sieht, diese Siedlungen außer Toronto oder Vancouver, dass diese Gebäude vielleicht ein bisschen zu schnell gebaut sind und alles aus Holz, aber nicht so nachhaltig gebaut sind und die sind dann Builders Grade, das muss dann vielleicht in 10, 15 Jahren neu gebaut, aber ja, das ist genauso ein Problem und es gibt dann verschiedene Möglichkeiten, sowas zu machen, aber es ist ein Problem in Kanada, nicht so stark wie in Deutschland. Ich weiß, dass, wenn es geht um die Regulatorik und so weiter, ist alles ein bisschen schwieriger in Deutschland. Manchmal sage ich, dass die Deutschen, die sind ganz gut im Marketing und auf Englisch würde man sagen, the Germans are very efficient. Und ich sage immer, das ist halb wahr, die Deutschen sind manchmal effizient, aber die sind ganz thorough. Und auf Englisch ist thorough eine ganz andere Sache als effizient. Und das sehe ich auch bei den Bauämtern, dass manchmal ist Thoroughness viel wichtiger als Effizienz.
Alex, vielen Dank nochmal auch für die Beantwortung der Frage und alles, was du uns jetzt mitgegeben hast. Wenn im Laufe dieses Tages nochmal weitere Fragen aufkommen oder wir nochmal persönlich auf dich zukommen wollen, wo finden wir dich denn?
Bin bis Mittag hier.
Perfekt. Das heißt also, wir schauen einfach, wo wir dich finden und gehen auf
den
dich
App
zu.
schreiben
Perfekt.
oder per LinkedIn.
Super. Dann erstmal an der Stelle danke für deinen Input.
Danke
Alex Watson.